Hi, everybody. This is Jay Carter, and we're back again with the Black Lawyers Podcast. Today, we have the pleasure of interviewing attorney George Fothery from Sidley. And welcome. Welcome to the interview. Thank you for joining us today.
It's my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Yes. Before we jump into George's journey as a Black attorney, we first want to hit him with a round of hot topics. I make all my guests do at least one hot topic with me. So today we'll be discussing a legal hot topic floating around regarding Kanye West's likeness and trademarks being used with Adidas and Gap. He recently ended his partnership with Gap specifically. And I think he thought once he said, I don't want to do business anymore, he could obviously just walk away with all his trademarks and continue to do his clothing items and athletic gear under his name without any restrictions. But a few days after he announced him terminating his partnership with Gap, they hit him with a very, very long list of restrictions saying that he couldn't use his name, his abbreviated name, Ye. He couldn't use the name Yeezy. So anything associated with his name or likeness, he could not use to go on, at least for a certain period of time, sell certain products. And Attorney George is on the call today to discuss physical property ownership, real property ownership rights. But we just wanted to briefly, Attorney George, get your take on just, rights in general and what Kanye West is facing right now, not being able to use his likeness, his trademarks, his own legal name to move forward with his products at this time.
Thanks, Jay. I want to be clear that I don't have any involvement in that case or matter. But we should also be clear that's not an area of the law that I'm particularly well versed in. What I'll say is that to me, this underscores the importance of having good legal counsel, especially for folks in business and entertainment, to make sure that they're well represented in any type of business transactions that they enter into.
For sure. And we'll continue to watch this transaction. I know he obviously has his own team of lawyers, I'm sure, trying to look for the loopholes of how he can move forward, whether it's creating just a brand new name so that he can avoid the restrictions. I'm sure they're at this time looking for loopholes. But as of right now, because he has this particular licensing deal with them, he is not able to move forward. So we will definitely keep this story on watch. Of course, Kanye stays in the news regardless of whether it's his business or his family life. So we will watch this story closely. Transitioning to why we have you here today. Speaking of rights, we are here to talk to you today about the Bruce Beach real estate transaction that you oversaw. And we wanted to ask you a few questions just to get more of a background for our listeners that are not familiar with it or not familiar with this particular beach in California. So our first question is, how did you first hear of Bruce Beach, and how did its history motivate you to take on the case and advocate for the Bruce family?
Yeah, thanks, Jay. I've got a friend who's a reporter in Los Angeles, and back in 2019, she called me and she said, I'm going to send you an article. I want you to read the article, and then I'm going to come over and I want to talk to you about the article. And so she emailed me the article, and it told the story of Bruce's Beach, which, for your listeners who are not familiar, in the 19-teens and 1920s, there was a African-American couple, Willa and her husband, Charles Bruce, and they were business people and entrepreneurs. They moved to Los Angeles County, and in 1912, they bought beachfront property in what is today the city of Manhattan Beach. And initially, they had just a sandwich stand where you could get a sandwich or a soda. Eventually, they put up a tent, and they would rent bathing suits, and you could go and you could change and go out and use the beach and come back and get something to eat. The business became so successful that just in a short time, they were able to buy more land and build a two-story building that became the Bruce's Beach Lodge. and it was wildly successful. You had African American families who came not only from all over Southern California and Los Angeles County, but from throughout the state and from throughout the Western United States to come to Bruce's Beach, which was a place where Black people could celebrate, enjoy time at the beach. You could rent a room, you could go and have a meal. There was dancing, and what happened is something that we've become familiar with, and that is some of the neighbors in the city of Manhattan Beach resented the success of the business, and they resented the fact that more Black families were coming, and Black families would come and they would buy land, they would own land in Manhattan Beach. And so what you saw really shortly after the resort opened was a series of harassment and intimidation tactics. They would erect fences so that the beachgoers would have to walk like a half mile either way. They would put up no parking signs to make it hard to get to the spot. People would come back from visiting Bruce's Beach and find their tires slashed. At one point, there was a group of people who stuffed an old mattress under the building and tried to set it on fire to burn the building down. And what you saw was, notwithstanding all of this animus from the community and the harassment and intimidation, the resort just became more and more popular. And so finally in the 1920s, a local real estate agent hatched a scheme for the city of Manhattan Beach to forcibly take the property via eminent domain. The city said, we need to build a public park. And it's got to be right here. It's got to be right where this building is. What's crazy is you look at maps of the area at the time, and you look to the right, you look to the left, and it's just sand. There's no buildings. It's empty land. But of course, where did the city say that the park had to go? Right where Bruce's Beach building was. And so in 1924, the Bruces lost their property at the same city council meeting where the city voted to condemn the property. The city also passed a number of ordinances which basically made it illegal to open up another business on the beach without city approval. They wanted to make sure that the Bruces didn't just move up or down the beach. And so that was the article that I read, and I was shocked for a couple of reasons. One, I was shocked that I had never heard that story. These were amazing African American entrepreneurs who came to Southern California with very little and built this thriving business. And I had never heard that story. I was frustrated. And I remember reading the story, being very frustrated, being very angry. And then my friend who sent me the article, she came over and we had lunch, and she said, look, she said, I think that you should do something. I think that you should use your legal skills and you should work to help get restitution for this family, to help them, help them get the land back or help them seek justice. And that's exactly what I ended up doing.
So that leads me to my next question. I mean, obviously, you said this happened and they lost it in 1924.
That's right.
1924. So obviously, it's been, almost 100 years, since this has happened. And so at this point, you have now just the descendants, right, that are still alive that may be entitled, to the property and the property rights. So could you describe to our audience what was the exact process of transferring the beach rights back to the I believe it's the great grandsons of Charles and Willa Bruce, who those are the descendants that are still alive. Like, what was the process of transferring it back to them? And then what was the most difficult part of that process?
Yeah, so it was an incredibly complex process, and frankly, it continues to be complex. Really, nothing like this has ever happened in our country's history. We've never had our government return property to Black people from whom it had been wrongly taken. So really, the process started when Los Angeles County officials heard the same story that I just told, and heard the same story that I had heard, and the LA County public officials decided that the land should be returned to the family. That's really what started the process. The problem was no one had ever done that. There was no precedent. There was no playbook. It had never been done. And so the county, decided, hey, we know the right thing is to give this land back. So I reached out to the great grandsons of Will and Charles Bruce, and to their sons. So my clients were the great grandsons and the great great grandsons, and I represented the family really in negotiating and working with the county to facilitate the return of the property. And it was an exceptionally complex process. The first thing that had to happen was the state of California had to pass legislation that would remove restrictive covenants that encumbered the property. This property was taken by the city of Manhattan Beach back in the 1920s. It was transferred to the state of California. The state of California transferred the property to the county of Los Angeles. And in those transfers, there were restrictions that said this property can only be used for beach access. It can only be used for public recreation. There were restrictions that said you can't transfer this property. If the county ever tries to transfer the property, it's going to go back to the state. So the first thing that folks realized is you actually need a law passed in California that would allow the county to transfer the property. So we worked with the California State Senate and California State Assembly to to have that legislation passed. Another complexity here was making sure that we represented the right folks. One of the first things I did on this case was I hired a genealogist. I wanted to make sure that when we got to the end of the process, there weren't folks who should have been involved and at the table making decisions who got left out. So we wanted to make sure we understood who all the descendants are, who all the living heirs were. We did that. I think probably you asked about what was the most complex part. Yeah, and it was the fact that this had never been done before, and so my team, and I want to be clear that I worked on a large team of attorneys who dedicated thousands of hours on a pro bono basis to make this happen. But our team, we spent a lot of time just thinking and brainstorming. What could go wrong here? If someone wanted to stop this, how would they do it? If someone was going to file a lawsuit to prevent the county from transferring the property back, what would they do? And so one of the most challenging aspects, frankly, was also one of the most exciting, and that was we just spent a lot of time thinking about how to get this exactly right. As we suspected, there was a lawsuit filed. There was an individual who sued the county to try to prevent the county from transferring the property to my clients. But because we had invested the time up front in this process and thinking through how could this be done, how could this be done in a way that would withstand legal challenge, we ultimately prevailed in that lawsuit.
Mhm. And with that being said, I mean, this is obviously something very historic, especially, in California. You're not finding, scenarios where land is being returned to, a Black family that it was taken from. I don't know if you're familiar with any other maybe cases around the country where this is similar, where land has been taken and, maybe a family is interested in, you know, reacquiring those rights. How do you think that this particular historic case may inspire others to look into how they can get property rights back to their families?
Yeah, thanks for that. I'll tell you that since this matter has started getting public attention, I get a phone call or an email on almost a daily basis, and it's from a Black family member, and the stories have similar facts. It's my great grandmother owned oil land in Texas, and when her husband died, they forged his name on a deed and stole the property from our family. Or my great uncle owned a farm in Louisiana, and men showed up on his porch one day with dogs and guns and said if they weren't gone, that they were going to kill the family. I've been overwhelmed, and my inbox and voicemail have been inundated with these stories about Black dispossession of property. And what it makes me think of is that the success we had with the Bruce family is an important historic and landmark example and milestone. But I think we really need much more systemic efforts to reverse the decades of Black land dispossession, and that the idea of attempting to do this on a one-off basis will be at it forever. What we've learned, and it wasn't just it wasn't just eminent domain, but there's been a long list of strategies that the government has used really at every level, from eminent domain to racially restrictive covenants to racially motivated zoning requirements to redlining. There's been a series of government-sponsored strategies that have resulted in Black people's inability to own property, create wealth, pass that wealth down on an intergenerational basis. And it strikes me that we need, really systemic efforts to help undo some of the damage that's been done by that.
Would you say that some of the systemic efforts would be, as you said, in some places, like the law actually just has to change? I mean, depending on the state, there may be maybe just even a law in the book. If that law wasn't there, perhaps a family member could reacquire the rights. So I guess it's just like you said, it may just depend on the state in terms of maybe that first step that those families would have to look at in terms of overcoming the challenge to get the property back.
Yeah, I mean, the systemic efforts that I think about, I mean, what's important is that these historic actions that I'm referring to and these stories that I'm hearing on a daily basis, they were not without consequence, right? You look around today and you look at disparities, like massive disparities in terms of property ownership between Black and white Americans. You look at massive disparities in income and in wealth levels between Black and white Americans. So those strategies that were used around depossession of Black property, we're feeling the impact of that 100 years later. We're feeling that today. And so when I think about systemic ways to address that, I think about ways to promote and encourage, Black property ownership. And there's lots of them. Down payment assistance, interest rate subsidy and assistance, additional support and forbearance when families, experience an economic loss that could result in them missing a mortgage payment, right? Some forbearance, some forgiveness that allows them additional time to get their finances back in order before they lose their home to a foreclosure. You see cities around the country experimenting with different models. The city of Manhattan Beach, out here in LA County where I live, they've got city-owned apartment buildings, and they're offering priority in the lottery process to descendants of Black families who lost their land to make room for public infrastructure for the 10 freeway that came through. You see other cities around the country offering college scholarships to descendants of families who lost property through eminent domain. So I think there's a lot of models, and I think what I'm pushing for is less focused on, kind of the one-off, doing individual assessments. When did this family lose their land? Where is that land now? Who owns it? What's it worth? And just a recognition that this was so widespread, it was so systemic, and the consequences of it are ones that we're still feeling today, not only on an individual basis, but on a community basis, that what we really need is a community-focused solution.
You mentioned that obviously your inbox has been full of people reaching out with similar stories. Obviously, if you haven't if they haven't retained you guys yet, obviously you can't discuss it. But is your firm at this point interested in taking, now that you've had so much success with this particular case, are you guys interested in taking on any more cases? Because I understand that this is pro bono, and so pro bono hours can only stretch but so far. But at this time, are you guys interested in helping any other families in addition to the Bruce Beach family?
Yeah, I think the role that we see at our firm is really sharing what we did. We've documented our process and sharing the model, helping people understand the steps that were taken. And really, personally, what I'm focused on is advocating for these, like I said, not one-off kind of family by family ways to address this, but advocating for solutions that help promote Black property ownership on a more general and more systemic basis.
With that being said, now that the beach has been returned to the descendants, what is their vision now for the beach, that's going to play into, its future legacy? What should, if someone's visiting California, someone wants to visit the beach, like what's next now for the family now that this has happened?
Yeah. So look, I think this speaks to really kind of the grace and the dignity of my clients in this matter. The County of Los Angeles officially returned the property to the family, and the family has agreed to lease the property back to the County of Los Angeles so that the county can continue to use it. The county currently uses the property to administer a lifeguard a lifeguard program there. And like I said, really a testament to the dignity and the grace and the humanity of my client, that they they were compelled to partner with the county and lease the property back and allow the county to use it. The county has erected a plaque, and then that reflection helps us going forward really commit to the hard work of restitution and thinking creatively about what form reparations could take to help promote more Black property ownership.
Great, great. Well, thank you for obviously giving us the breakdown. Like I said, I'm sure, if if you don't have the legalese to really understand everything about a transaction as complex as this, it would probably go over most of our viewers' heads. But the way that you explained it was very thorough. So we appreciate that. And we definitely look forward to see what's next with Bruce's Beach. And just like you said, just you even be able to kind of give the playbook to other families in terms of them being able to reacquire their rights. We're looking forward to hearing more stories like this. Part of the podcast, most of my viewers know we bring on obviously Black attorneys, Black judges, Black celebrity advocates, just various people that advocate in the law in various ways. And so obviously you are a Black attorney at Sidley, and we know that the Obamas were there at one point. And so we just want to, talk to you briefly about your experience of becoming an attorney. I say this statistic all the time. I'm sure my viewers are sick of me saying it, but, less than 5% of the U.S. legal profession are Black attorneys. And that number, believe it or not, has not moved very much in the last probably 50 or 60 years. That number does not move. So a part of the reason why we have the podcast is to show people that, yes, you can become an attorney, you can be successful at it, and to really advocate for diversifying the legal profession more. So just for that, we obviously appreciate you being on. So could you tell the audience, who were you before you were, big partner, attorney George, like before you even entered law school, where you're originally from, and what kind of led you to this path of becoming a lawyer?
Sure, happy to talk about that. Before I do, let me just say, it's not an accident or a coincidence that I ended up at Sidley Austin, which is a firm that, as you mentioned, Michelle and Barack Obama both practice here. I'm a transactional attorney. I represent commercial real estate companies in complex commercial transactions. But I'm also someone who feels very strongly about, giving back, paying it forward, issues of social justice. And Sidley is a firm that really shares those values around using our platform and our network, either through pro bono or board service or supporting nonprofits, to really advance issues related to equity, social justice, racial justice. And it's also, frankly, a firm that's leading by example in terms of diversity and promotion of Black associates into the partnership. So not a coincidence that I'm here. To your question of what was I doing before I became a lawyer, look, I've always, since I was since I was in high school and probably even before, I've always felt a pull towards service. Operating officer for the California Charter Schools Association, and our mission while I was there was really, making sure that there were high quality public school that frankly had not had access to quality public education in decades, if not generations. I was passionate about that work. I felt like we were having an impact and moving the needle. And I think what drew me to law school was all advocacy, all service and impact. I think I really began to see and experience and understand the special and unique skills that attorneys had and the special and unique roles that they played in getting things done and having impact. And I thought that's something I'd like to do for myself.
What law school did you attend, and what was your favorite law school class?
Very proud graduate of Loyola Law School in downtown Los Angeles. I worked full time during law school. So when I went back to law school, I had been out of undergrad for probably about 7 years. I had a wife, I had 2 kids, I had a mortgage, and I had a career that I loved. And so I wasn't interested in putting that career on hold to go back to law school and then come back. So I worked full time during the day, running the nonprofit. And Loyola Law School has an amazing hybrid program, which when I was there, it was a 4-year program, and you take classes, during the evening. And I think Loyola was also a great match, not just to fit, kind of my lifestyle and my schedule, but it's also grounded really in strong kind of social justice values. And so it was a perfect place for me, not only to develop, strong legal training and legal skills, but it married that training and skills with a commitment to justice that I try to bring into my work now. I'm not sure what my favorite class was. I can tell you what my favorite class was not, and
Okay,
that was
we'll do
real
that one.
property law. Yes,
Really? The
it was
irony.
real property, which is ironic because
The irony.
for the past 15 years I've been a real estate attorney, and I'll tell you, Jay, it was really only probably only when I represented the Bruce family that it just struck me like a bolt. Okay, that's why you became a real estate attorney. It never made sense to me. Growing up, my family, we didn't own real estate. Nobody that I knew had worked in real estate. I did not love the real property class in law school. But it's one of those things. It's a path that I ended up on, and love, and I'm passionate about. But it never was obvious to me why this was the path that was laid out before me, until I read that article about the Bruces. And what struck me then is that this opportunity is one that I've been preparing for my entire professional life, and it's one that I've been passionate about and committed to my entire personal life.
Yeah, I think that's actually really funny that you did like real property. I'm really chuckling
Yeah,
over here.
yeah,
It was like you're all with Bruce's Beach. Well, like you said, you never know when things circle back around, when you'll need them. So I think that's a good example for anyone that's in law school that's listening to this. If you're struggling with the course or you're struggling with anything in law school, contracts,
that's right.
whatever you're struggling with, you just never know how it can be a full circle moment from you years later that you're like, that's why I needed to learn this, or this is why I really needed to pay attention to that. So I think that's actually really interesting. Obviously I mentioned that, you don't have a lot of Black lawyers, you don't have a lot of Black law students, right? You're not the acceptance rates and things like that are not as high amongst Black law students. So once you're in these spaces, you tend to be maybe the only one or maybe one of very few. Did you ever face any sort of like discrimination or anything in your journey of becoming a lawyer while you were in law school? Was there ever an experience where you felt like, I'm being treated a little differently?
Look, I'll say a couple of things about that. I'll say, it is true what folks say about the expectations being different, about working harder, about working longer, about getting it right more. I think that was consistent with my experience. Look, I think that I also got a lot of mentorship, sponsorship, and support by people that look like me, and frankly by people who do not look like me. And I think that's something that has been really critical in the path that I've been able to create for myself, and the success that I've had is the fact that I did have mentors, sponsors, supporters who didn't look like me. And I sought them out and they sought me out. I'll tell you, more than anything, I think the key that's kept me in this profession for the past 15 years was early on, as a very junior associate in big law, I found a community of Black lawyers, and that was, like you said, like there's not always big numbers in the firms, but the folks there, we would get together once a month. We'd go to a conference room, we'd close the door, and we'd have our sandwiches, and we would just, we'd talk and we'd compare notes, and and it wasn't always, about work. It was just about support each other, and it's really that community and support that has helped, sustain me, motivate me, encourage me. And that's why it's so important now that I'm a partner in the firm that I'm being very conscious and deliberate about creating that space, creating that support system and network for our associates to feel like they've got the support to stick it out and do this work.
What was your best moment in law school? I'm sure you had plenty. It sounds like you were a very good law school student, but was there anything like maybe a mock trial you won or becoming editor? Was there anything that happened in law school you were like, this is why I'm here. This is why I'm doing this?
It wasn't, it wasn't a single moment. I loved the class discussion experience. I loved, briefing the cases, reading the cases the night before, having, my case book highlighted or tabbed, and going into class and really not knowing where the professor was going to take it or where the other students were going to go with it. I mean, that was that was my best moment. My best moment was being in the discussion group and feeling that I knew for certain how this should come out, and then having one of my students on the other side of the room raise their hand and give their view. And it was a perspective that I had not even considered. And it completely shifted and changed the way that I thought about the outcome of the case. It was that like real-time intellectual development that was my favorite experience in law school. And has really kind of prepared me for the work I do now, not just with the Bruce's Beach case, but look, the deals that I work on are large and complex commercial real estate and corporate transactions. There's not always a playbook. It's not always something that's been done before. And the skills that I leverage and pull upon are those, let me look at this from the other side. Let me take this from the other point of view. If we wanted to prevent this from happening, what would we do? And those were the conversations we were having in law school.
Something I want to piggyback on briefly, you mentioned just how some things are just systemic. Like, if we change certain things systemically, we'll have obviously better results in the future. With the legal profession being less than 5% Black and that number not really moving too much, what do you think can be done to encourage, I call them the Generation Z. They drive me nuts. My nieces in the Generation Z, they want everything now. They don't want to go to school forever. So, being a lawyer, doctors, these professions are not as attractive, right, to this next generation that's coming up. What do you think can be done to encourage the next group of, Black lawyers, Black law students? What do you think can be done?
Yeah, so look, I feel a lot of responsibility around that. I feel like those of us who are in the profession and who love what we do have an obligation to share our experience, to encourage other people to pursue this career, to support them when they set out to pursue it. On a generalized basis, we tend to have fewer folks in our families who were lawyers or who practiced law or were judges. So I feel a real responsibility to support, and not just encourage, but really to support, to mentor, to help assist other people do this. I think it's also important to talk about the ability to do this authentically. And it's something that I'm very proud about in my career. I work at one of the world's top law firms. My clients are, large, sophisticated, businesses and investors. I like to think that I provide outstanding legal service to my clients. I'm also very committed to using my firm, my platform, my network, my legal skills to pursue a lot of the issues that are important to me personally. And those are issues related to, we talked about, public education reform, issues related to racial justice, issues related to disability rights. And I think being a professional, being an attorney and being a professional in a big law firm, you have that opportunity. And I think we need to talk about that. I think we need to talk about we can be an amazing professional and we can also use our skills and experience to advance issues and causes that are important to us.
Last but not least, what would be your advice to potentially a lawsuit? Maybe a law student already likes real property, already likes real property contracts, wants to get into what you're specifically doing. What would be your advice for your particular practice area for a law student that is listening?
So first of all, I want to be very clear. I did not love my real property class in law school, but I love being a real estate attorney. To me, it's the best of all worlds because you're a strategic advisor to your clients. You're a problem solver. You get to see the fruits of your labor. You get to drive by and see that's a building that I bought or sold or financed. This is a development that we worked on. So, and it's very much a track that relies heavily, like a lot of things, on relationships, professional and personal relationships. So I could not encourage enough folks who are interested in pursuing a career in real estate law. You mentioned the numbers kind of across the legal career. We're definitely underrepresented in the real estate space, and it's a fascinating, interesting, highly rewarding space. So my advice is, real estate law is really about business. It's about the deal. It's about the transaction. I used to joke that one of the reasons I became a real estate lawyer is because there's not a lot of law in real estate law. If you think about it, like if you're a tax lawyer, you've got the Internal Revenue Code. If you're a litigator, you've got rules of civil procedure. If you're a securities lawyer, you've got, the SEC. If you're a real estate lawyer, what's the law? The law is the deal that we negotiate. And so from my perspective, it has a lot more opportunity, for creativity, for really understanding the drivers of the business, the drivers of the deal. So my advice is, if you're interested in real estate law, you should really focus on understanding the real estate business, and that's going to make you an outstanding attorney.
Okay. All right. I think that's great advice. And speaking of which, we actually end all of our interviews with a Black Excellence Moment of the Week. Our Black Excellence Moment of the Week goes to New York City. They are actually honoring Cicely Tyson's with a couple of streets in Harlem. I believe it's East 100 and First Street between 3rd and Lexington. They are renaming that whole area Cicely Tyson Way. So shout out to New York City for honoring the legendary Cicely Tyson with that area. That was the neighborhood that she grew up in. And so they're actually renaming that area under her name. So that is our Black Excellence Moment for the week. And we would just like to thank again Attorney George for joining us, letting our viewers know a little bit more about Bruce Beach. Of course, we are excited to see what's next with Bruce Beach and just the other families that will potentially use as you say, your playbook to assist in their matters. I'm sure, as you said, because the story is so huge, we'll hear more stories of more families going back after property ownership. So we really appreciate you and Sidley putting in all those pro bono hours to make that happen for the family. And we look forward to hearing what's next for Bruce Beach and what's next for you and Sidley. And we just want to thank you for your time. And here at the Black Lawyers Podcast, we're always rooting for everyone Black. Thank you, everyone.